My name is Vreth-Olun, Senior Xenobiologist aboard the Galactic Academic vessel Undying Patience, and I want it noted, for the official record, that I filed 3 separate complaints before any of this happened. 3. Nobody listened. And now I am sitting here composing this report with only 4 of my 6 limbs, because the other 2 are bandaged, and the lead medic aboard this ship keeps giving me a look that translates roughly to, "You absolute fool, I warned you." Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning is important, and also, frankly, hilarious in a deeply painful way that I will never fully recover from. The assignment seemed simple. Our crew had been tasked by the Galactic Academic Council to observe a Class 7 pre-stellar species on a planet designated Survey Orb 119c, more commonly known to its inhabitants as Earth. The Council had rated these creatures, humans, as Level 2 threat assessment. Level 2. Do you know what else is Level 2? The fluff bug of Mirror 4. The Mirror 4 fluff bug, whose primary defense mechanism is rolling into a ball and emitting a mildly unpleasant smell. Humans were filed next to the fluff bug. I want whoever made that decision to know that I think about them every single night. The mission parameters were straightforward. Our team of 6 researchers, myself included, would observe a human educational facility, what they call a school, for 1 standard rotation. We would remain cloaked. We would not interact. We would simply watch, record data, and leave. Simple. Neat. Completely destroyed within 4 hours. The facility we chose was large, grey, and smelled aggressively of something the humans call institutional lunch. We materialized our cloaking platform in the corner of one specific room, a classroom on the 2nd floor, and prepared for a long, quiet, boring day of note-taking. The room held approximately 30 small humans, ages between 13 and 14 by our estimation, seated in rows on individual chairs behind flat rectangular desks. At the front of the room stood one adult human, a tall female with short red hair and an expression that suggested she had already given up on her species long before we arrived. Her name, we learned quickly, was written on a board at the front, Miss Dara Fenn. The young humans called her something else entirely when she turned around. We noted this behavior as social friction within hierarchical groupings and moved on. The lesson itself was about something called photosynthesis, which truthfully, we had already documented better than these humans could explain it. My colleague Vreth-Olun began to snore within the first 20 minutes. I let him. There was nothing happening. This was my first mistake. You should never let your guard down around a species whose scientists thought it was a good idea to strap themselves to controlled explosions and launch themselves into space. That is not the behavior of a calm, reasonable, boring organism. That is the behavior of something that decided physics was a personal challenge. But I did not think about this. I let Vreth-Olun snore. I sipped my nutrient tube. I watched Ms. Dara Fenn explain chlorophyll to 30 children who were clearly somewhere else mentally. And then, the door opened. It was not a polite door opening. It was the kind of door opening that announces itself like a declaration of war. The entire frame rattled. Every head in the room snapped toward it with the unified instinct of prey animals detecting a predator, which, looking back, was absolutely the correct response. In walked 4 humans, large ones. Not adult large, but that specific teenager who grew too fast and became structurally dangerous before developing emotional regulation, large. The kind of large that walks sideways through doorways not because they have to, but because they want you to notice that they could. The biggest of them was a human male with a jaw that appeared to have been carved rather than grown. His name, we later learned, was Turo Vesik. I mention his name specifically because, by the end of this report, you will understand why his name deserves its own paragraph. Turo Vesik walked into that classroom like he owned not just the room but the concept of rooms in general. "Vesik," said Miss Dara Fenn, in a tone she usually reserved for existential disappointment, "you are 40 minutes late." "Traffic," said Turo Vesik. "We are in a school. Bad hallway traffic." 3 of the young humans in the room made noises that their species produces when something strikes them as darkly funny. The ones called snickers. Ms. Dara Fenn's left eye did a very small twitch that our biometric sensors rated as significant stress indicator. Turo Vesik sat down in the back row, directly in front of a young human male, who we had been watching with particular interest for the past 20 minutes. This boy, small, wire-thin, with messy dark hair and large ears that seemed to belong to a slightly bigger version of himself, had been quietly taking notes with a focus that was frankly unusual among his peers. His name, we later gathered, was Solen Mara, We noted Solen Mara because, unlike the others, he kept glancing at the corners of the room, specifically our corner. I told myself it was coincidence. It was not coincidence. The disruption began subtly. Turo Vesik, apparently bored by the photosynthesis lesson, began producing a series of low-level provocations toward the students around him. Flicking small objects, whispering things that caused visible discomfort, nudging desks, classic social aggression behavior. We had seen it in 11 other species. It was boring, predictable, not worth noting more than a checkbox on the standard aggression behavior form. What was not predictable was Solen Mara's response. He said nothing. He did not react. He simply continued taking notes. But very slowly, without drawing any attention to himself, he reached down beside his desk and moved his bag slightly closer to his feet. I frowned at this. Something in my secondary brain, the one specifically wired for threat detection, made a small noise. Not loud, just a quiet, I did not listen to my secondary brain. This was my second mistake. Turo Vesik escalated. By the third hour of the school rotation, he had moved past subtle provocation into something that required Ms. Dara Fenn to intervene 3 separate times. Each time she turned back to the board, it started again. This is a behavior pattern we have catalogued across 37 species. The moment authority looks away, the aggressor resumes. Universal constant. What is not a universal constant, we would soon discover, is what happens when the prey in that equation is a human who has been quietly and calmly doing math in a corner. Because Solen Mara had not just been taking notes, he had been doing something else entirely. During each small moment of classroom distraction, each time Ms. Dara Fenn turned to write something, each time Turo Vesik's little performance captured the room's attention, Solen Mara had been, piece by piece, quietly disassembling the broken chair beside his desk. The chair had been sitting unused for 2 weeks, one leg cracked nearly through, the seat tilted sideways. Nobody had removed it. Classic institutional neglect. Solen Mara had noticed it on the first day, apparently. He had noticed it the way you notice something and file it away under useful. Not immediately, not dramatically, just quietly, in the back of the mind, where humans apparently store contingency plans that no other species in the known galaxy would ever think to form. He had been slowly, calmly, during 40 minutes of classroom time, working the cracked leg free. And now, during a particularly loud moment where Turo Vesik knocked another student's bag off their desk and laughed, Solen Mara had a chair leg in his hands. Our biometric sensors screamed. I grabbed Vreth-Olun by the shoulder and shook him awake. Record everything, I hissed. What? Said Vreth-Olun, blinking. Everything. Now, record it. Is it the photosynthesis lesson? Because I already have notes from when we observed them on Rota 7, and it is exactly the same. It is not the photosynthesis lesson. Solen Mara did not stand up dramatically. He did not shout. He did not do any of the things that other species, when pushed past their tolerance threshold, typically do. He simply held the chair leg in both hands, turned around in his seat with the calm of someone who had already run every possible outcome through his head during the 40 minutes he was allegedly taking notes on chlorophyll, and he looked at Turo Vesik. He did not say anything threatening. He did not raise the chair leg. He simply held it and looked. Now, I want to pause here and explain something about human eyes. We have studied eyes across many species. Most use them to see. Humans use them to communicate things that their words cannot contain. When Solen Mara looked at Turo Vesik, something happened in that classroom that we have only ever theoretically discussed in xenobiology seminars. Every human in the room understood exactly what was being communicated. Every single one, simultaneously, without a single word. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. In those 4 seconds, the 3 other large humans who had walked in with Turo Vesik slowly turned and looked at each other. Ms. Dara Fenn, who had been writing something on the board, stopped writing. The students in the front row leaned very subtly forward. The students in the back row leaned very subtly backward. And Turo Vesik, who had been grinning, stopped grinning. What? Said Turo Vesik, after 4 seconds. Is that? A chair leg, said Solen Mara. What are you going to do with it? Solen Mara tilted his head very slightly. I don't know yet. Depends on what happens next. Our senior researcher, Dr. Vreth-Olun, grabbed my arm with all 3 of her hands and said, in a very quiet voice that was trying extremely hard not to be a scream, is that a threat? Are we documenting a threat display in a level 2 species? I think, I said slowly, we may have miscategorized. Vreth-Olun. Yes, that child just produced a weapon from furniture. Yes. In 40 minutes. Yes. While doing homework. Yes. What happened next is the part of this report that I had to write 3 times, because the first 2 drafts were rejected by my review board for lack of clinical objectivity. In other words, I was too emotional, which is fair, because what happened next is not something any of us were prepared for. Turo Vesik stood up. He was, by human standards, large. By our standards, he was small but dense, built the way their planet seems to build things, heavier than they look, faster than they should be, and deeply, fundamentally unwilling to back down from something they've committed to. Evolutionary stubbornness. It's in every system of their body. They evolved it when they were chasing things across their savannas. It did not leave when they built cities. He stood up, and he said, "Put it down." And Solen Mara, who by all biological metrics should have been the less dangerous party in this interaction, said, with extraordinary calm, "Make me." Vreth-Olun made a noise beside me that I can only describe as the sound of someone's entire academic career flashing before their eyes. Because Solen Mara had not simply picked up a chair leg. While none of us had been paying close enough attention, which is our shame and our failure, and will be noted prominently in my personnel file, he had also, at some point during the lesson, unwound the metal support wire from the broken seat joint, and he had wrapped it, tightly and precisely, around one end of the chair leg, not decoratively, with purpose. The wrapped end was the grip. The other end, the heavier end, was what he was currently pointing at Turo Vesik, with the patience of someone who had decided, very quietly, that today was the day. "He made a spear," said Dr. Vayun Posk. "A short spear," I said, because for some reason my brain needed to be precise at this exact moment. "He made a short spear from a chair, technically a modified club with a reinforced grip and an improvised." Vreth-Olun. "Yes. Stop talking." Turo Vesik looked at the chair leg spear. He looked at Solen Mara. He looked at the chair leg spear again. Something was happening behind his eyes, some very rapid and apparently complicated re-evaluation of the situation. We have seen this expression on 17 species. It is the expression of someone who had a plan and is now realizing very quickly that the plan had assumptions in it that were wrong. The whole class was silent. Miss Dara Fenn had turned around from the board. She was looking at Solen Mara. She was looking at the spear. She was looking at Turo Vesik. And then, and I want this detail in the official record because it tells you everything about the human educational experience, she said, very quietly. "Solen, where did you get the wire?" "The chair, Miss Fenn." She looked at the disassembled chair. She looked at the chair leg in his hand. She looked at the wire wrapping. She said, "Did you do that during my lesson?" "During the part about the light-dependent reactions," said Solen Mara. "I already knew that section." One of the students in the front row made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, a short, terrified, helpless laugh. Then 2 more. Then the whole front row was doing it, quietly, into their hands, the specific laughter of people who are watching something that is both extremely funny and extremely tense and have no idea which emotion to commit to. Miss Dara Fenn pressed her fingers to her temple. Turo Vesik had not moved. Solen Mara had not moved. The chair leg spear had not moved. And outside in the hallway, very faintly, a bell began to ring. I will finish part 1 here, because what happened in the next 60 seconds changed the threat classification of the entire human species, caused 2 of my colleagues to file immediate early retirement requests, and resulted in me personally sending an urgent transmission to the Galactic Academic Council with the subject line, "Please update the fluffbug classification immediately. This is not a drill." Part 2 will detail the aftermath, the hallway, and what Solen Mara did with that chair leg after the bell rang. I would prepare yourself. Let me tell you something about bells. Every advanced species in the known galaxy uses some form of signal to mark the transition between activities. The Vorath of Sector 9 use a low harmonic hum. The Peludi use a flash of bioluminescent light. The Krenish use a smell, which personally, I find aggressive, but nobody asked me. Humans use a bell. A loud, sharp, sudden bell that cuts through every conversation, every tension, every carefully constructed moment of social standoff, and announces to the entire building that time has been divided and everyone must now move. When that bell rang, I watched something remarkable happen. Turo Vesik blinked. Not a dramatic blink, not a slow, meaningful blink. A fast, involuntary blink. the kind that happens when your nervous system receives a signal it was not expecting and has to briefly reboot. Because for the past 90 seconds, everything in his body had been focused entirely on Solen Mara and the chair leg. His posture, his breathing, the angle of his chin, all of it had been locked into a single configuration that said, I am deciding whether to escalate this. And then the bell rang. And his body, trained by years of institutional conditioning, tried to switch modes. This is the thing about humans that nobody in the Galactic Academic Council had ever properly studied. They are simultaneously capable of extraordinary threat response and extraordinary social compliance. The same creature that will, without hesitation, turn furniture into a weapon during a lesson about plants, will also stop everything it is doing when a bell tells it to. They are, in a word, compartmentalized, and Solen Mara knew this. The moment the bell rang, Solen Mara stood up. He did not lower the chair leg dramatically. He did not make a speech. He simply stood, tucked the chair leg under his arm like it was a textbook, picked up his bag from the floor, and began walking toward the door with the casual energy of someone whose biggest concern was which hallway to take. Mara, said Miss Dara Fenn. He stopped. The chair leg stays here. Solen Mara looked at her. He looked at the chair leg. He looked at Turo Vesik, who had not yet moved, who was still standing beside his desk doing that rapid re-evaluation expression. Then Solen Mara looked back at Miss Dara Fenn and said, Is that a rule? Because I checked the student handbook, and it only mentions weapons that are brought from outside the building. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence from the previous one. The previous silence had been tense. This silence was the specific silence of everyone in the room understanding that they were watching someone who had, at some point in the recent past, read the student handbook for exactly this reason. Dr. Vreth-Olun grabbed my arm again. He planned this, she whispered. He planned this, I confirmed. He read the rulebook. He read the rulebook. To find the gap. To find the gap. Vreth-Olun. Yes. I want to go home. I understand. Me too. Miss Dara Fenn, to her extraordinary credit as a member of her species, did not panic. She looked at Solen Mara with the expression of someone who is doing very rapid legal and ethical calculations in real time and finding them inconclusive. She said, Leave it on my desk. Will it be here after school? I beg your pardon? The chair leg. Will it be here, on your desk, after school? Or will it be in the lost and found? Or will it disappear? Miss Dara Fenn stared at him for a long moment. Are you negotiating with me? I am asking a clarifying question, said Solen Mara, pleasantly. Vreth-Olun, who had by this point fully woken up and was recording everything with all 6 of his data collection appendages operating simultaneously, leaned over and whispered to me, This child is going to run something someday. A company, a government, a fleet, a planet, I said. Possibly several. We watched Miss Dara Fenn take a slow breath. It will be on my desk. After school, I will make sure of it. Solen Mara considered this. Then he walked to her desk, set the chair leg down with a small definitive click, nodded once and left the room. The remaining students left in a wave behind him, fast, the way a crowd exits a space where something nearly happened. Turo Vesik was the last to go. He walked past Miss Dara Fenn's desk, past the chair leg, and out the door without looking back. Miss Dara Fenn sat down in her chair, put her head in her hands, and said something very quietly that our audio sensors picked up with perfect clarity. She said, I need a different job. We should have stayed in the classroom. Our protocols were clear. Remain stationary. Do not follow subjects into uncontrolled environments. Document only what can be documented from the fixed observation point. I want to be transparent about the fact that all 6 of us left the classroom. All 6. Including Dr. Vreth-Olun, who had co-authored the protocol manual. Including Vreth-Olun, who technically had seniority over me and should have ordered us to stay. Including our youngest researcher, a very nervous first year named Orcs, who had spent the entire morning whispering that he was worried the school was too chaotic for proper observation. Orcs was the first one through the door. We followed Solen Mara into the hallway. The hallway of a human secondary school during a class transition is something I will spend the rest of my professional life trying to accurately describe and consistently failing. Imagine several hundred organisms, all moving in different directions, all convinced that their direction is correct, all producing noise at frequencies that overlap and compound and bounce off hard surfaces, all operating under a social hierarchy that is completely invisible to outside observers but is, apparently the most important thing in any of their lives. It is not unlike the Grethian swarm markets of Sector 4, except louder, and the stakes are somehow higher. We moved through it invisibly, cloaked, weaving between students, and tracked Solen Mara as he moved with purpose down the main corridor toward the east stairwell. He was not alone. 2 other students had fallen into step beside him. One was a tall girl with thick braids and the posture of someone who had decided, early in life, that she would take up exactly as much space as she wanted. Her name, we gathered from a passing conversation, was Yara Bet. The other was a shorter boy with round glasses and an expression of permanent mild concern, who was called by everyone around him Pico, just Pico, no other name offered. "That was the most insane thing I have ever seen," said Pico, in a whisper that was definitely not a whisper. "You've seen me do worse," said Solen Mara. "I have never seen you build a weapon during 3rd period. It was not a weapon, Solen. It was a modified structural element with a reinforced grip." Yara Bet made a sound that is universal across every species we have ever catalogued. The short exhale through the nose that means, "You are technically correct and I hate it. Turo is going to find you after school," she said. "Probably," said Solen Mara. "You left the chair leg upstairs." "I know. So what is your plan?" And Solen Mara smiled and said, "I did not leave everything upstairs. Now, I want to take a moment here to explain my professional state of mind. I am a senior xenobiologist. I have studied 42 species across 19 star systems. I have watched creatures that breathe sulfur negotiate trade agreements. I have observed species that communicate entirely through color changes, perform what can only be described as theatrical productions. I have been present for first contact situations that reshaped the galactic academic understanding of intelligence itself. Nothing in my career prepared me for what Solen Mara pulled out of his bag in the east stairwell of a building called Whitmore Secondary School on the 3rd planet of a minor star system that until this moment had been filed under emerging civilizations, low threat, check back in 50 years. From his bag carefully wrapped in what appeared to be part of a gym uniform, he removed 2 additional chair leg sections, shorter ones, from a different chair, bound together with what appeared to be zip ties, which are small plastic fastening devices that humans use for approximately 1,000 purposes, none of which include, and I cannot stress this enough, assembling secondary weapons in a school stairwell. Fell made a noise behind me that sounded like a small animal being startled. "2, said Vreth-Olun flatly. "There are 2. There are 2, I confirmed. He built 2. He built 2. During one class period. During one class period about photosynthesis, Yara Bet looked at the 2 shorter implements in Solen Mara's hands. She looked at him. She said, "When did you make those?" "Gym class yesterday," said Solen Mara. "There were 2 chairs in the corner with broken legs. I asked the gym teacher if I could throw them away for him." Yara Bet stared. Pico stared. We stared. "Solen," said Pico, "how long have you been planning this?" Solen Mara thought about this question with the expression of someone doing a small calculation. "Since Tuesday," he said. "Turo knocked my lunch off the table on Tuesday." Pico looked at Yara. Yara looked at Pico. "That was 4 days ago," said Yara Bet. "Yes," said Solen Mara. "You spent 4 days preparing for after school on Friday. I spent 4 days preparing for a possible situation that might occur after school on Friday," Solen Mara said, with a precision that made Dr. Vyun Posk quietly sit down on the stairwell step, right there, in the middle of our cloaked formation, and put her face in her primary hands. "There is a difference. I was hoping I would not need any of it. And the one upstairs, the one you left on Fenn's desk." Solen Mara smiled again. It was a very calm smile. The smile of someone who has thought about this. "That one was the Decoy," he said. "I filed the emergency reclassification request from the stairwell. I want that noted. I did not wait until I was back on the ship. I did not wait for the end-of-day debrief. I pulled out my transmission pad, right there, crouched on a step between Vreth-Olun and Fell, while 3 human teenagers stood 5 feet away discussing tactical misdirection, and I transmitted directly to the Galactic Academic Council's priority line. The message read, and I am quoting myself directly, "Request immediate upgrade of Survey Orb 119C human species from Level 2 to Level 8 threat assessment." Justification. A 14-year-old member of the species constructed a 3-piece weapon system over 4 days using discarded furniture, read the institutional rulebook to identify legal grey areas, deployed a decoy item to manipulate authority figures, and coordinated the entire operation during a lesson about plants. Please advise. Also, please review our entire classification database, because I no longer trust any of it. The council's response came in 40 minutes. It said, please clarify. Are you reporting a military threat? I transmitted back, no, I am reporting a child. That is somehow worse. The after-school confrontation did happen. Turo Vesik found Solen Mara near the east bike racks at the edge of the school grounds, which was, we noted, an outdoor space with multiple exit routes, decent sight lines, and no direct camera coverage from the school building. Solen Mara had positioned himself there on purpose. We know this because Yara Bet was standing at the corner of the building, and Pico was standing near the fence, and neither of them was positioned casually. They had a perimeter. A 14-year-old boy had established a tactical perimeter near the school bike racks. Turo Vesik arrived with two of the friends who had walked into class with him that morning. Large humans, the specific large that comes from the human habit of applying competitive physical effort to everything, including sports that seem to have been invented primarily as excuses to run at each other. For a moment, everyone simply looked at everyone. Then Turo Vesik said, "You don't have your stick." "No," said Solen Mara. "So what are you going to do?" Solen Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced one of the short zip-tied chair sections and held it loosely at his side. Turo Vesik's jaw shifted. "And Yara has the other one," said Solen Mara, very pleasantly, in case you were counting. And then, because this species has never once in its history done the predictable thing, Yara Bet walked around the corner, and she was not alone. She had brought 4 other students. Not large students, not aggressive-looking students, just students, who had apparently also had their lunches knocked off tables at some point in recent history. 7 people on one side, 3 on the other. The math was not complicated. Turo Vesik looked at the numbers, he looked at the chair leg sections, he looked at the students behind Yara Bet, who were not threatening anyone but were also very clearly not leaving. And something moved across his face that I have only ever seen in species that have been described by sociologists as capable of rapid adaptive social recalibration. He recalibrated. "This is stupid," he said. Nobody argued with him. He turned and walked away. His 2 companions followed. One of them glanced back once. Solen Mara raised one hand in a small wave. The companion turned away faster. We watched Solen Mara put the chair section back in his pocket. We watched him turn to Yara and Pico and the 4 others. We watched all 7 of them stand in the afternoon light and look at each other with the specific expression of people who have just survived something they were not entirely sure they would survive. And then Pico said, "I cannot believe that worked." And Solen Mara said, "I can." And Yara Bet said, "We need to return those chair legs before someone notices they are missing." And they walked back toward the school entrance, arguing about who was going to sneak them back into the gym storage room, their voices fading as they moved away, back into the building, back into the ordinary rhythm of a Friday afternoon. We left Survey Orb 119C the following morning. The debrief on the ship lasted 4 hours. Dr. Vayan Posk spoke for most of it. Brix Toven requested reassignment to a different sector and was denied, or Rufel sat very quietly in the corner and did not speak except once, near the end, when he raised one tentative limb and said, "Should we warn someone?" "Warn them of what?" said Dr. Vayan Posk. "That the humans are coming." None of us answered him, because here is the thing about Survey Orb in 119C, the thing that kept me awake for the entire transit back to the council hub, the thing that I put at the very end of my official report in a section labeled Concluding Observations, where I wrote it in the plainest language I could manage, because I wanted no possibility of misinterpretation. Solen Mara was not special, not in the way we were afraid of, not a singular outlier, not a 1 in a billion anomaly that could be noted and filed and forgotten. He was special the way their species produces special, quietly, routinely, in the corners of unremarkable rooms in ordinary buildings on a planet that the Galactic Academic Council had literally filed next to the Mirror 4 fluffbug. He was special in the way that, when I cross-referenced our recordings with 30 other schools we had passively catalogued data from across the planet, I found variants of him in almost every single one. Different faces, different names, different problems being solved with different pieces of discarded furniture or repurposed materials, or very carefully read rule handbooks. The species had been doing this since before they had cities, before they had writing, before they had any of the things that other species require, before they start being dangerous. They had always been doing this. We just were not paying attention. My final report to the Galactic Academic Council was 47 pages long. The executive summary was 2 sentences. Reclassify Survey Orb 1119C humans from Level 2 to the highest threat assessment level your current scale supports. Then consider expanding the scale. The Council acknowledged the report. They said they would review it. They said the reclassification process requires confirmation from multiple field teams and that standard procedure must be followed. Standard procedure. I replied to their acknowledgement with a single attachment, a 13-second video clip. A thin boy with big ears and messy hair, sitting quietly at the back of a classroom about photosynthesis, winding wire around a chair leg with the patience of someone who had already decided how the day was going to end. I did not include any additional commentary. I did not need to. My name is Vreth-Olun, Senior Xenobiologist, and this concludes my official field report on Survey Orb 119C. I filed it with the Council on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 3 other field teams had independently submitted urgent reclassification requests from 3 different human cities on 3 different continents. Different children, different problems, different pieces of furniture. Same expression. The Council updated the classification on Friday. They gave humans a Level 9. They had never given anything a Level 9 before. We did not have a Level 10. We made one the following week, just in case.